8. Roxana Sikorski. In 2014, an emotionally troubled teenager from Wayne County, Michigan, named Roxana Sikorski turned to the internet for support. She opened up to an older stranger named Michael Rivera, and the two soon began an inappropriate relationship. When Roxana's adoptive parents found out about her secret older boyfriend, they reported Rivera to the police. Shortly after law enforcement got involved, Roxana cut her brother's throat one day during the early morning hours. The victim survived, and Roxana's plan to kill her entire family was thwarted when another household member saw what was happening and screamed loudly enough to wake everyone up. It's unclear whether Rivera persuaded Roxana to commit the horrific act because of the legal problems he was facing due to their age gap, or if he and Roxana co-conspired. They were both charged in connection with the crime, and prosecutors pushed for maximum accountability despite pleas for leniency from Roxana's parents, who forgave their daughter for her actions. Rivera was convicted of his role in the murder plot and sentenced to life in prison, while Roxana begrudgingly took a plea deal and admitted to a reduced count of assault with intent to murder. She was handed a sentence of 10 to 20 years. During her sentencing hearing, Roxana stared at the floor until it was her turn to talk. She tearfully apologized to her family, struggling to get the words out between sobs, and at one point she completely broke down. She later withdrew her guilty plea. Roxana tried to get a new trial, but the appeal was eventually dropped. She continues to serve her original sentence. 7. Dylan Schumaker. When a man from Springville, New York named Dylan Schumaker lost his temper while babysitting his girlfriend's son in early 2012, the consequences were fatal to the child and life-ruining for Schumaker. During his trial for second-degree murder, Schumaker admitted that the victim's loud crying made him snap. The jury found him guilty after deliberating for just 3 hours. When Schumaker arrived in court for his sentencing, he immediately began sobbing dramatically and pleading with the audience, claiming that he didn't mean to kill the victim. His attorney urged the judge to impose the minimum sentence of 15 years to life. But Schumaker's tearful display garnered no mercy from the judge, who described the convicted killer as a manipulator. Before imposing the punishment, the judge told the court about how Schumaker stated in a jailhouse phone call to his mother that he was a 16-year-old blonde, and that all he had to do was cry in front of the jury and they would feel sorry for him. Having painted a crystal-clear picture of his true colors through his own words, Schumaker was sentenced to the maximum of 25 years to life. After appealing his case, he received a reduced sentence of 18 years to life. 6. Taekwan Mitchell. During the pre-dawn hours one day in January 2014, 22-year-old Taekwan Mitchell and his friend Dion Dorsey fatally shot 29-year-old Marcus Waters at the victim's home in DeKalb County, Georgia. Prosecutors claimed that the suspects committed the senseless act because they wanted to get their hands on some marijuana. Both men were charged with murder, and Mitchell was released on an ankle bracelet pending the outcome of the case. He was found guilty more than 2.5 years later in October 2016. Shortly after being convicted and awaiting his sentencing hearing, Mitchell removed his ankle monitor and escaped the state. He was apprehended in South Carolina and remained in custody until his ultimate court date, during which he had a chance to address his actions. Clutching a wad of tissues, Mitchell cried as he apologized for his crimes and for making the situation even worse by attempting to flee. He claimed that he was trying to visit his grandmother in North Carolina and blamed his difficult upbringing for how he turned out, describing how he bounced from one place to the next following his mother's death when he was a teen. As someone who grew up in an inner city and faced her own challenges during her youth, the judge was unmoved by Mitchell's tearful explanation. She emphasized how Mitchell's choices played a role in where he ended up, and that his circumstances were not purely to blame, as she handed down a life sentence plus 40 years. 5. Lauren Pazienza. In one of the most high-profile criminal cases to make New York headlines in recent years, an 87-year-old retired vocal coach named Barbara Meyer Gustern was mercilessly shoved to the ground on a Manhattan sidewalk by a stranger in early 2022. For no apparent reason, Gustern's assailant charged her from behind, causing the senior citizen to smack her head against the concrete while she waited for a taxi to go see one of her students perform. While waiting for emergency responders with a huge bleeding gash in her head, Gustern told a friend that she'd never been hit so hard in her life. Police arrived just in time to get a description of the attacker before she fell unconscious. She was rushed to the hospital, where doctors treated her for brain trauma and fought to save her life, but she died from her injuries. 2 weeks later, Gustern's attacker, 26-year-old Lauren Pazienza, turned herself into authorities and was charged with manslaughter. While her motive for shoving Gustern remained unclear, the defendant was accused of calling Gustern a bitch right before she pushed the woman to the ground. Pazienza denied the name-calling allegation and repeatedly showed an inability or perhaps a refusal to take responsibility for her actions. She gave numerous inconsistent stories about her role in the unprovoked attack and even tried claiming that she accidentally ran into Gustern. Despite her varying accounts of what happened, Pazienza eventually decided to give up her attempts to minimize her role in the tragedy and pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter. She was expected to receive an 8-year prison sentence, but was hit with an additional 6 months by the judge, who tore into the defendant for her multiple failures to own her actions. Pazienza sobbed at her sentencing, but seemed to only feel sorry for herself. She spat out a 10-second apology before being nudged by her lawyer to say more. During her second attempt at acting remorseful, the convicted killer said that she should have never pushed anybody and that she was so sorry. Given her behavior all along throughout the case, it's understandably hard for many to believe that she was being genuine. But it was the best the court was going to get from Pazienza, who began serving her sentence in October 2023. She'll become eligible for parole in the year 2029, but could remain behind bars until November of 2030. 4. Martin Shkreli. Martin Shkreli, better known to many as the Farmer Bro, made headlines for his cocky attitude and smart aleck mouth even before his arrest in early 2015 for financial crimes. And unlike many who humble themselves in order to save face after being nabbed by the authorities, the Brooklyn-based entrepreneur only dialed up his obnoxious behavior following his arrest. The widely despised Farmer Bro made enemies with the general public in 2014 after obtaining the sole rights to manufacture a life-saving HIV drug, Daraprim, and raising the cost by 5,000%. While he faced no criminal charges related to the Daraprim controversy, his unapologetic response to public outrage, coupled with the price hike, undoubtedly harmed his reputation. To make matters worse, Shkreli was accused of starting his pharmaceutical company using money from 2 failed hedge funds, bilking investors out of tens of millions of dollars, and leading to federal charges for 2 counts of securities fraud and 1 count of conspiracy. He was convicted on all counts in late 2017. After the hearing, Shkreli had told reporters that he was delighted with the outcome of the case, which he described as a witch hunt of epic proportions. Shkreli was singing a different tune just months later when he pleaded with the judge for leniency as he wept during his sentencing hearing. Through tears, he said that he was never motivated by money to commit his crimes. And while his emotions weren't as dramatic as some of the other displays mentioned in today's list, Shkreli's sheepish behavior stood in stark contrast to the bratty demeanor that he'd clung to right up until that day. Despite his past antics, the tears seemed to somewhat work. The judge overseeing the case remarked that Shkreli seemed genuinely remorseful about his egregious multitude of lies, but criticized him for repeatedly minimizing his actions. Shkreli was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. After unsuccessfully appealing his case, he applied for compassionate release during the COVID-19 pandemic, claiming that his pharmaceutical company needed him to develop a remedy to the virus. The judge denied the request, describing it as yet another act of delusional, self-aggrandizing behavior, and Shkreli remained locked up until May of 2022, when he was transferred to a halfway house. He's since completed all his legal requirements and has kept a relatively low profile since then, living a much quieter lifestyle than he did before he fell off his high horse. 3. Zachary R. Members of a far-right neo-fascist militant organization called the Proud Boys played a significant role in the US Capitol riot on January 6, 2021. Following the insurrection, federal authorities arrested the organization's Philadelphia chapter leader, Zachary R, for leading an enraged mob toward the Capitol. During his trial, R claimed to have no memory of several things that he was accused of doing, and that there was evidence of, including spattering members of law enforcement with an unnamed chemical. The court also heard about how R acted unremorsefully after the riot and before his arrest, describing the attack on the Capitol as a good start to taking the country back the right way. R was found guilty of seditious conspiracy, with the defense advocating for a maximum 3-year prison term and the prosecution pushing for 30 years. A compromise led to R being sentenced to 15 years in prison. The presiding judge concluded that R committed perjury and added a terrorism enhancement to his charges. However, this enhancement was weakened by the absence of significant loss of life resulting from R's actions. As of September 2023, among riot suspects awaiting trial, R's 15-year sentence ranks as the 3rd longest in connection with the Capitol attack. Despite the substantial sentence, U.S. District Judge Timothy Kelly expressed dismay at his decision, questioning aloud whether he would ever again impose such a lenient punishment, given that it was 15 years below both the recommended guidelines and the prosecution's recommendation. But the judge's generosity didn't stop R from bawling his eyes out as he told the court that he became consumed by politics in the lead-up to the riot. He described the January 6th insurrection as a despicable day, as he vowed to be done with politics, choking out his words between sobs and deep breaths. Hopefully, his remorse was genuine, and it was the last time he'll land himself in federal court for alleged crimes against his own country. 2. Dominic P Sola. In case you haven't noticed, a lot of the defendants who committed brazen acts of rebellion during the January 6, 2021 Capitol riot in Washington, D.C. have acted a lot less bold when it comes to facing criminal charges for their actions. Included among this growing number of tough guys turned timid is former Proud Boy Dominic P Sola, who was accused of smashing a Capitol window with a stolen police riot shield. The 46-year-old was acquitted of seditious conspiracy, but found guilty of assaulting, resisting or impeding a police officer, robbery of government property, and destruction of government property. P Sola wept as he pleaded with the judge for leniency during his sentencing hearing in September 2023, describing his participation in the riot as the worst, most regrettable decision of his life. He also claimed that he stood before the court as a changed and humbled man, while giving himself a verbal pat on the back for taking responsibility for his actions and admitting to his wrongdoings. P Sola was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. But any expressions of remorse or turning over a new leaf that he expressed during the hearing became highly questionable when he raised his fist in the air and yelled "Trump won" while being led out of the courtroom. He was one of several defendants who expressed their support for Trump while leaving court after their sentencing, and it's enough to raise doubt over whether certain rioters truly regret their actions. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. 1. Carl Krueger. Former New York State Senator Carl Krueger's career was upended in 2010 when he fell under federal investigation for allegedly offering political favors in exchange for campaign contributions. In 2011, he was indicted along with 7 others for allegedly accepting at least $1 million worth of bribes over a decade-long period. In federal court, Krueger eventually confessed to accepting sufficient bribes to finance his $2 million waterfront mansion in Brooklyn's upscale Mill Basin area, along with the Bentley parked in its driveway. Notably, he tearfully pleaded guilty to 2 counts of conspiracy to commit mail and wire fraud, as well as 2 counts of bribery conspiracy. The situation was described by New York Times journalist William Glaberson as humiliating, highlighting Krueger's tear-soaked tissues during his emotional breakdown at the defense table. Despite the cringe-inducing display, it was understandable given that the defendant was potentially facing up to 50 years in prison. However, the judge's surprisingly lenient decision should have transformed Krueger's tears into tears of joy, as he received a sentence of only 7 years behind bars, a fraction of the maximum term. Records show that Krueger was released from prison in 2018 after serving roughly 6 years. In the years since, he's occasionally been spotted in public, including at community meetings. He's also been accused of throwing tantrums during these meetings, but has managed to avoid any further legal trouble.
Number 8. Life-ending love triangle. In 2022, 30-year-old Ashley Bocanegra went to an apartment in Beaufort, Georgia. She thought she was going to see the father of her child. What she didn't know is that the man's girlfriend, 27-year-old Antonetta Stevens, and his sister, Janine Gonzalez, were using his cell phone to lure Ashley over. Stevens discovered that the man was cheating on her and was furious. When Ashley arrived, Stevens allegedly attacked her. According to police, she beat her, then asked Gonzalez if she wanted in on the action. Together they kicked and punched the victim until she could no longer breathe and recorded the attack on video. The man and women were entangled in a love triangle with someone who was also reportedly home during the vicious assault. Authorities have not released many details about the nature of his involvement, but they said his shoulders and back were covered with injuries. He took Ashley to the hospital a few hours after the attack, but her injuries were so serious she had to be taken elsewhere. She later died from internal bleeding in her lungs. Stevens and Gonzalez were quickly charged with murder, robbery, and aggravated battery. In court, Gonzalez's lawyer claimed that she was an innocent bystander and that she should only face a reduced manslaughter charge. But prosecutors argued the video evidence proves otherwise. Both women remain behind bars without bond while awaiting the next steps in their cases. Number 7. Birthday bloodshed. In 2022, Ahmad Perkins was walking up the front steps of an apartment building in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, on his 45th birthday when he was shot in the head. He fell to the ground and died in broad daylight. When police got there, they saw Perkins' BMW double parked and idling in the street. The shooting was clearly unexpected. In the words of a neighbor who spoke with the New York Daily News, it seemed like someone was waiting for him. Perkins had a troubled past that included 4 prison stints for assault, drug and gun charges. But he was incredibly well liked by people in his community, and after being released from his most recent sentence in 2018 and finishing parole in 2021, the hospital worker's life seemed to be heading down a better path, and nobody, including the police, knew who might have wanted him dead. 2 months after the shooting, 18-year-old Kendu Skeen was finally charged with murder after being taken into custody for an unrelated case. Authorities declined to reveal a motive, and the case is ongoing. Number 6. Terroristic Trio. In a story that's just as bizarre as it is tragic, police were called to a remote property in New South Wales, Australia one night in late 2022 regarding the possible location of a man named Nathaniel Train, who'd been missing. The 4 officers who initially responded were immediately met with gunfire after getting out of their vehicles. 26-year-old Matthew Arnold and 29-year-old Rachel McCrow were fatally shot, while another officer escaped with only minor injuries. The fourth cop found herself battling fires which the shooters lit, trying to corner and hunt her down, but one of the surviving cops luckily managed to call for backup. In the meantime, a neighbor came by to help the police and was also killed. The hours-long standoff ended after the three shooters were put down by police. They were identified as Larry Train, the missing man, his brother Gareth and Gareth's wife Stacy, who had once been married to Larry. The trio practiced an extremist form of fundamentalist Christianity called premillennialism, which influenced them to think police were evil. Evidence at the scene indicated that the Trains planned and prepared for the massacre well ahead of time, and that they lured the officers to the property. Upon investigation, authorities saw that the site was riddled with barriers, camouflaged hideouts, guns, knives, and dirt roads. In an interview with the Australian talk show A Current Affair, Gareth and Larry's father, Ronald Train, said that his sons completely lost their way in life after cutting their family out of their lives 20 years earlier. He said their fascination with weapons started during childhood, but that Gareth was particularly volatile, controlling, and obsessed with guns, despite being raised in a household with non-violent beliefs. Officers classified the incident as an act of terrorism and said it was the first time in Australia's history that such a violent crime was linked to extreme Christian beliefs. Law enforcement ruled out the likelihood that anyone else in the country was involved in the attack, but they linked the Trains to some people in the United States and notified American authorities. Number 5. Deceptive Drive-By. 27-year-old Sukhdeep Gill was working as a deputy for the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office in California when he called for help from his colleagues in 2020, claiming he had been shot in a drive-by shooting. Gill said he stopped along a remote road to pee and that he was walking back to his patrol car when a silver sedan pulled up with its headlights turned off. Someone then shot at him from a passenger side window, and he returned fire, shooting at the car twice before it sped away. Responding officers were relieved when they found Gill practically uninjured. The bullet had shattered his body cam, but otherwise he seemed okay. An extensive manhunt failed to turn up any trace of the alleged shooter. In fact, investigators couldn't find any evidence of the attack to support what Gill had told them. They also found evidence that suggested the shooting was fake, which helped explain why they couldn't find any solid leads. Over a year after the strange incident, authorities charged Gill with filing a false police report and felony vandalism. He was put on administrative leave while the case played out in court. Allegations against Gill came as a huge disappointment to District Attorney Jeff Rosen, who described the case as bewildering and deeply disturbing. On top of breaking the law, he accused Gill of breaking the trust of his fellow officers and squandering public resources on a made-up crime instead of the community's safety. Number 4. Baited and beaten. Former Texas State Senate candidate Vanessa Tijerina had a terrible Christmas Eve in 2020 when she was lured to a hotel and attacked. It all started when a woman in a black bra approached Tijerina in Raymondville, near the Mexican border. The mystery lady identified herself as Amanda Salinas. She told Tijerina that she had to tell her something important about her safety before leading her to a room at a nearby Texas inn. When they arrived, 3 people bound, gagged, and brutally beat Tijerina, leaving her with a severely bruised and swollen face and broken teeth. During the assault, the victim overheard a man giving instructions to the suspects over the phone. Authorities charged Salinas and the other 2 attackers, Ariel Vera and Raymond Santana Jr., with a list of crimes. Salinas was accused of engaging in organized criminal activity, assault, unlawful restraint, aggravated robbery, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and more. Santana Jr. and Vera were charged with engaging in organized criminal activity, unlawful restraint, and other crimes. The outcomes of the case are unclear, and the trio's motive for attacking Tijerina remains a mystery. Number 3. Christian family targeted by cartel. After the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, popularly known as the Mormon Church, banned polygamy in the 19th century, people who wanted to continue the practice formed their own separate communities. Some migrated about 70 miles, 113 kilometers south of the Arizona-Mexico border, where they formed a rural enclave called La Mora. Located in a desert valley surrounded by mountains, the small community has fewer than 1,000 residents. Many descend from the original settlers, while others moved there more recently. Lamora was historically known as a community that lived away from the outside world, but their peace was shaken in 2019 when drug traffickers ambushed 3 SUVs and 17 people along a remote dirt road. Violence wasn't unheard of in the area, but locals had traveled along the road many times before without any issues. At the time of the attack, the Sinaloa cartel was involved in a heated turf war with another drug syndicate. Cartel members opened fire on the victims in a disturbing case of mistaken identity, thinking they were drug trade enemies when they were actually just innocent civilians who had no desire for any trouble. 9 people died in the shooting, including 3 young mothers. Some of the surviving victims, which included at least 5 who were suffering from gunshot wounds, hid in nearby bushes while others walked to find help. Terry Langford, who holds dual citizenship like many others from Lamora and splits his time between Mexico and the US, lost an aunt and 2 cousins that day. He told the South Florida Sun-Sentinel that his aunt was on her way to Phoenix and his 2 cousins were on their way to visit relatives in another part of Mexico. In response to the shooting, the military increased its presence in the region, but the gunmen remained at large in the weeks after the senseless tragedy, and it's unclear whether they were ever actually arrested or not. Number 2. Lone gunman versus federal agents. In what turned out to be the deadliest incidents for the FBI since the attacks on the World Trade Towers in 2001, a gunman opened fire on federal agents who were carrying out a search warrant in Sunrise, Florida in early 2021. The team gathered outside the apartment of 55-year-old David Lee Huber early in the morning with plans to catch him off guard. But the investigation went horribly wrong when Huber started shooting at the team, killing Special Agents Daniel Alfin and Laura Schwarzenberger and hurting 3 others. He then took his own life. A witness said they heard dozens of gunshots and watched a SWAT team crash a military truck into Huber's front patio during the chaos. Huber lived alone and had no criminal record in the state of Florida. On paper, he seemed like an ordinary law-abiding citizen, minus a handful of traffic citations. He was educated and made a good living as an engineer, but had recently lost his job after going off on a bizarre rant about Donald Trump during a work meeting. After he was fired, former co-workers were reportedly worried that he might return to the company and carry out a revenge shooting. He was an awkward loner who was known for acting overly hostile and disrespectful toward his neighbors. One person who lived nearby told the South Florida Sun-Sentinel that he never met Huber, but that he had called the cops on him and complained to their homeowners association about him in the past. A former neighbor remembered one instance when Huber, who she described as odd, allegedly confronted an exterminator with a gun, and police had been called to his home multiple times over noise and nuisance complaints. At the time of the shooting, the FBI was investigating Huber for crimes against minors, which was a serious departure from his otherwise squeaky clean history. The act of violence marked the first double shooting of FBI agents in the line of duty in over 30 years, and rocked the law enforcement community to its core. Residents at Huber's apartment building were also left shaken by the incident, which served as a chilling reminder that you never know what your neighbors are capable of. Number 1. Journalist meets injustice. Percival Mabasa, or Percy Lapid, was a popular radio commentator from the Philippines, which is considered one of the most dangerous countries for journalists to live in. Corruption is rife, guns are easy to get, and the government seems to not like free speech just as much as criminals. In addition to being members of a historically vulnerable profession, journalists in the Philippines are no match for the sheer power of their enemies. Despite these dangers, Lapid fought endlessly for journalists' rights at a time when professionals in the field were being targeted with violence and government restrictions tightened their speech. He also openly criticized high-ranking politicians, including the country's president. The 63-year-old was driving in the city of Las Piñas one night in 2022 when 2 men on a motorcycle suddenly caught up with his car and opened fire on him, shooting him through the vehicle's window. Lapid died not long after from his injuries. Authorities were hesitant to declare a motive in the crime, but many people naturally assumed Lapid was probably killed for his outspoken efforts in defense of his profession. The case garnered worldwide attention among journalists, free speech advocates, and human rights groups who strongly urged Philippine leaders to investigate the case and bring the shooter to justice. A few weeks after Lapid's death, a man named Joel Estorial confessed to the crime and surrendered to law enforcement. He turned over a gun that he said was used in the shooting, and ballistics tests confirmed he was telling the truth. Estorial was charged with murder and put in jail to await the next steps in his case as it works its way through the country's slow justice system.
Thanks for watching. Do you think it should be considered perjury, or a crime in general, for a criminal defendant to fake cry in front of a judge or jury? Let us know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe.